Howdy out there, folks. This is Darius Dale here to present our macro minute for Thursday, April 21, 2022. As starting with the markets, we have stocks mostly up, commodities mostly up, crypto up, dollar flat, global bond yields up. Market moving headlines this morning, we have Tesla jumping up around 7.5% in pre-market trading after posting record profits that blew past analyst estimates. Shifting gears to the ECB, traders are now betting on 3 quarter-point hikes after governing council member Pierre Wunsch said policy rates could be raised above zero before year-end. And the bank may even have to deploy restrictive policy to get prices under control. Adding to that sense of urgency, that incremental sense of urgency out of there, you have fellow board members, ECB board members, Louis Windows, pardon me on the name pronunciations, and Martin Kazak's said a rate hike in July was possible. So pulling forward that a little bit. Shifting gears to China here, President Xi Jinping called for rejection of what he called a Cold War mentality and quote unquote small circle alliances, which we believe are veiled swipes at the U.S. following criticism of China's stance on the war of Ukraine. He also called for a continued focus on health despite the cost of a zero COVID policy. So that caused Chinese stocks to be off minus 2.3% today. Big down move there, bucking the trend. The U.S. economy from the Beige Book survey released on Wednesday. The Beige Book confirmed the U.S. economy grew at a moderate pace through mid-April. So from that, if you need to hear anything, the key takeaway from that is that the Federal Reserve very much on board to do a 50 basis point liftoff, a 50 basis point hike in May. And then you got Powell speaking today, Lagarde speaking today as well at the IMF event. And then lastly, PMIs, the preliminary April PMIs will be out tonight and tomorrow morning. Silver also off 2.4% from a big mover perspective, and then Bitcoin up over 2% as well. Shifting gears to the charts, U.S. dollar bullish FAMs, minus 1% of downside versus 1.1% of upside in its probable range. So a fair fight there. Gold neutral VAMs, minus 1.8% of downside versus 2.8% of upside there. 10-year nominal Treasury bullish FAMs, minus 28 basis points of downside versus 17 basis points of upside. High OAS broke to neutral VAMs today. This is a high market CDX index. If you look at it on a Bloomberg, the Bloomberg series is already neutral VAMs, but the CDX broke down to neutral here this morning with 25 basis points of downside versus 21 basis points of upside. As you can see there, we had a little bit more of a normal distribution now in the probable range process coming from that bullish VAM skew. That positive skew there. S&P 500, that is neutral VAMs now, or it's been neutral VAMs, sorry, minus 3.6% of downside versus 2.5% of upside. VIX bearish VAMs, minus 28% of downside versus 20% of upside. So somewhat of a fair fight there involved. NASDAQ 100, neutral VAMs here, minus 3.8% of downside versus 6.3% of upside in its probable range. Russell 2000, still neutral from the perspective of our volatility, just a momentum signal, minus 5.5% of downside versus 2.4% of upside. Bitcoin neutral VAM still minus 10% of downside versus only 4% of upside. So bounced off the low boundary's probable range, getting close to the upper boundary here. Similar story with Ethereum, but not quite as much movement. Ethereum neutral VAMs minus 9% of downside versus 7% of upside in its probable range. Shanghai Composite bearish VAMs minus 1.4% of downside versus 5.9% of upside. WTI crude oil neutral VAMs still minus 11.7% of downside versus 8.6% of upside. And then agricultural neutral VAMs still hugging the upper boundary of its probable range there for the last few days, minus 5.5% of downside. And then industrial metals neutral VAMs still kind of a fair fight, minus 3.1% of downside versus 3.4% of upside. So with that, Darius Dale presenting our macro minute for Thursday, April 21st, 2022. Best of luck out there today.